Listen up, because in 1984, 5 robot lions combined into one giant defender and absolutely dominated afternoon television. I am talking about Voltron, the show that had every kid in America screaming about forming blazing swords and defending the universe. But here is the thing. This franchise that seemed unstoppable somehow crashed and burned so hard that it took decades to recover. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. And what nobody tells you is the real story behind Voltron. This was not just an American cartoon. It was a Frankenstein creation stitched together from two completely different Japanese anime series that had nothing to do with each other. The people who made it barely understood what they were working with, and the corporate decisions that followed turned a phenomenon into a cautionary tale. So, in this video, I am going to walk you through the entire rise and fall of the original Voltron. We are going to answer 3 burning questions. First, how did an American company take Japanese robot anime and turn it into one of the biggest hits of the 1980s? Second, why did the franchise collapse under its own weight despite having one of the most iconic giant robots ever created? And third, why did it take so long for Voltron to make a proper comeback when the nostalgia was always there? But first, let me give you some context on just how strange the origins of this show really were. All right, so picture this. It is 1983 and a company called World Events Productions is looking for content to syndicate to American television. These guys are based in St. Louis of all places. Not Hollywood, not New York, St. Louis, Missouri. And they are about to accidentally create one of the most beloved franchises of the decade. Ted Koppler was the guy running World Events Productions. His company had access to a library of Japanese anime through a distribution deal, and he saw what was happening in the American market. Transformers was coming. Kids wanted robots, giant robots, robots that transformed and combined and did cool stuff. So Koppler and his team started digging through the Japanese content they had access to. And they found something interesting. A 1981 anime called Beast King Go Lion. It featured 5 robot lions that combined into one giant super robot. The animation was incredible. The action was intense. The designs were absolutely iconic. There was just one problem. Go Lion was violent, really violent. Characters died. Blood was shown. The tone was dark and serious in a way that would never fly on American afternoon television. This was Japanese anime made for Japanese audiences with Japanese sensibilities. But here is where it gets interesting. World Events Productions did not care about staying faithful to the source material. They were going to rebuild this thing from the ground up for American kids. Part 1. The Rise. So here is how the transformation happened. World Events Productions took Beast King Go Lion and completely gutted it. They rewrote every single episode, changed character names, removed deaths and violence, added new dialogue that was lighter and more kid-friendly. They turned a dark Japanese mecha anime into an American action-adventure cartoon. The 5 pilots became Keith and Lance and Pidge and Hunk and Princess Allura. The evil empire got a new name. The whole mythology was restructured to make sense for kids who had no context for the original Japanese version. And then they did something even crazier. They needed more episodes to fill their syndication schedule. Go Lion only had 52 episodes. That was not enough for daily syndication, which needed at least 65 episodes to run for a full quarter without repeats. So they grabbed a completely different anime called Armored Fleet Derriger XV. This show had nothing to do with Go Lion. It featured 15 vehicles that combined into a different giant robot. Different characters, different story, different everything. World Events Productions said, who cares? They rebranded Derriger as Vehicle Voltron and pretended it existed in the same universe as Lion Voltron. They wrote new scripts connecting the 2 shows through some loose narrative framework. It was held together with duct tape and hope. And here is the kicker. It worked. It worked incredibly well. Voltron Defender of the Universe premiered in September 1984 and became an instant phenomenon. Kids did not know or care that this was 2 different Japanese shows awkwardly merged together. They just knew that 5 robot lions combining into one giant robot was the coolest thing they had ever seen. The Lion Force episodes were particularly massive. That formation sequence became iconic. Each lion had its own color and pilot and personality. The blazing sword finisher was the moment everyone waited for, and Prince Lotter made for a memorable villain with his obsession with Princess Allura. The ratings were huge. Voltron was competing directly with Transformers and G.I. Joe and holding its own. By 1985, the show was one of the highest-rated syndicated programs for kids in America. Merchandise was flying off shelves. The action figures from Panache Place and later Matchbox were must-have toys. World Events Productions had struck gold. They had taken someone else's creative work and repackaged it for a different market and made millions. But here is the thing about building a franchise on borrowed content. Eventually the source runs dry. Part 2. The Fall. Alright, so this is where the story gets complicated. Because Voltron did not die all at once. It died in stages through a series of decisions that seemed smart at the time but destroyed the franchise piece by piece. First problem. Vehicle Voltron was a disaster. Remember that second anime they grafted onto the franchise? Derriger XV became Vehicle Voltron and kids absolutely hated it. The 15 vehicles combining was confusing. The characters were not as memorable. The whole thing felt like a cheap substitute for the Lion Force that everyone actually loved. World Events Productions had created their own competition. Every time Vehicle Voltron aired instead of Lion Voltron, ratings dropped. Kids would tune in hoping for lions and get vehicles instead. It was a bait and switch that damaged trust in the brand. Second problem. They ran out of Japanese content. Go Lion had 52 episodes. Derriger had 52 episodes. Once those were adapted, there was nothing left to work with. World Events Productions did not have their own animation studio. They could not just make new episodes. Their entire business model depended on having Japanese source material to repurpose. So in 1986, they commissioned something called Fleet of Doom. This was a crossover special that brought Lion Voltron and Vehicle Voltron together. It was an attempt to squeeze more content out of both franchises, but it was also clearly a desperate move from a company running out of options. Third problem. The toy situation was a mess. Unlike Transformers and G.I. Joe, which had tight integration between toy companies and cartoon production, Voltron, toy licensing was chaotic. Multiple companies held rights at different times. Quality varied wildly. The toys did not have the same coordinated marketing push that competitors enjoyed. Matchbox eventually got the main license, but by then the momentum was already fading. The toy line could not sustain itself against the juggernaut franchises that had better corporate synergy. Fourth problem. The 1984 to 1987 period was absolutely brutal for competition. Transformers was at its peak. G.I. Joe was dominating. He-Man was still strong. Thundercats entered the arena. The market was oversaturated with action properties, all fighting for the same kids and the same toy dollars. Voltron had a strong concept but weak infrastructure. There was no American production capability to make new content. There was no tight toy partnership driving revenue. There was no long-term plan beyond adapting whatever Japanese content they could find. And here is what really killed the original run. World Events Productions tried to make an American-produced Voltron series in 1989 called Voltron: The Third Dimension. Actually, wait, that came later. In the late 1980s, they simply had nothing new to offer. The well was dry. By 1988, Voltron had faded from the airwaves. No grand finale, no proper ending. Just a slow disappearance as stations stopped running the episodes and kids moved on to the next big thing. Part 3. The Wilderness Years. So here is where Voltron entered what I call the wilderness years. From the late 1980s through the 1990s, the franchise existed in limbo. The original episodes would pop up in reruns occasionally. The toys became collector items, but there was no new content keeping the brand alive. World Events Productions tried to revive it in 1998 with Voltron: The Third Dimension. This was a CGI animated series that attempted to continue the story. And let me tell you, the CGI has not aged well at all. It looked rough even by 1998 standards, and today it is almost unwatchable. The show ran for 26 episodes and failed to capture the magic of the original. The CGI format felt wrong for Voltron. The stories did not resonate. Fans of the original were disappointed and new kids did not care. Then in 2011 there was Voltron Force on Nicktoons. This was another attempt at revival featuring a new generation of pilots alongside the classic characters. It lasted 26 episodes before cancellation. Again, the magic was not there. Here is the pattern. Every few years someone would try to bring Voltron back, and every time it would fail to connect. The nostalgia was real, but translating that nostalgia into a successful new product proved almost impossible. The franchise was stuck. Too beloved to abandon completely. Too difficult to revive successfully. Part 4. The real story. So here is what the rise and fall of Voltron really teaches us. The original success was built on a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a fundamental disconnect between what Voltron appeared to be and what it actually was. American kids thought they were watching an American cartoon. They had no idea they were seeing a heavily edited Japanese anime with completely rewritten scripts. The magic they fell in love with was actually the magic of Beast King Go Lion filtered through American sensibilities. When World Events Productions ran out of Go Lion episodes, they had nothing. They could not recreate what made the show special because they did not fully understand what made it special. They were distributors and editors, not creators. Compare this to Transformers, where Hasbro and Sunbow developed a genuine creative pipeline. Yes, Transformers also originated from Japanese toys, but the American side built real production capabilities. They could make new content. They could evolve the franchise. They could keep the machine running. Voltron never had that infrastructure. It was always dependent on content created by someone else for a different market. When that content ran out, the franchise had no foundation to stand on. And here is something else nobody talks about. The franchise was legally complicated. Rights were split between multiple entities. World Events Productions controlled the American adaptation. Toei Animation owned the original Japanese content. Various toy companies had their own licensing deals. Getting everyone aligned for new projects was a nightmare. This is why it took until 2016 for Voltron to finally get the revival it deserved. Voltron Legendary Defender on Netflix was produced by DreamWorks Animation with proper resources and creative talent. It ran for 8 seasons and actually worked. It proved that the concept was still viable when executed correctly. But that success came decades after the original collapse. An entire generation grew up without new Voltron content. The franchise that could have been evergreen like Transformers instead became a nostalgic memory for people who grew up in the mid-1980s. The 5 lions are still iconic. That combination sequence still gives people chills. The blazing sword is still one of the coolest finishing moves in animation history. Voltron had everything it needed to be a permanent fixture in pop culture. What it lacked was the business structure to sustain itself. And in the entertainment industry, that matters more than quality or nostalgia or iconic design. So yeah, the original Voltron rose fast and fell hard. It went from phenomenon to afterthought in just a few years. But here is what they could not kill. The memory of those 5 lions coming together, the excitement of that transformation sequence, the pure joy of watching the defender of the universe save the day, and I will form the head. That line lives forever in our hearts. No corporate failure can ever take that away. Thanks for watching, but here is the thing. Voltron was just one piece of the massive anime adaptation wave that hit America in the 1980s.